All right, good morning everyone. Welcome to Friday, day before the long weekend. As you just heard in the announcement, there's no school on Monday, so don't come here because there'll be no one here. Similarly, don't go to my YouTube channel because nobody will be there either because it's a holiday. Although I think it's going to be pretty cold and snowy this weekend, hey? No? Yeah? But you're like, you're so sad? Why? And you can't go out? Yeah, it's kind of, it's tough, right? You got 3 days off and you're not supposed to hang out with people. You're not supposed to go out anywhere. Can't do anything. It's going to be snowy and cold and too much homework. Ugh, life.
We'll have a quiz there as well.
Yeah, I think we should probably do a quiz next Friday, on Friday, not on Monday. Now let's do Friday.
We had it. We have one on social, so it's probably.
Unless you want to do it Thursday.
Monday.
No, Monday's too long.
Friday's good.
Okay.
Yeah, so we'll get time, like social justice, Friday, and next.
Yeah, you'll have like an hour beforehand. Yeah, okay, so let's do that. So before we forget, let's set quiz number 2 for next Friday. I guess, is that the 19th, I guess? 19th of February? Next Friday we'll do quiz number 2. It'll be the same kind of approach as last time, and we'll do maybe classes like 11 to 22 or something like that. And so today's class 23, so it'll kind of end yesterday-ish. Yeah, so I'll post that in Microsoft Teams with all the information, but let's plan for that because we're almost halfway through the term, terrifyingly, so we got to keep going. Also, don't forget your papers are due tonight at midnight. And don't forget to submit them through Microsoft Teams on the little assignments tab. If you click assignments and then I think your name, you should be able to add resources so you can attach it, and then I'll be able to have everything in one place and it'll be easy for me to mark. Please and thank you. All right, so Basil's here. Good morning, Basil. And Michelle is here. Good morning, Michelle. And Hadil is here. Good morning, Hadil. So let's see. Oh, yes. India. We've been talking about the sort of foundations of Indian culture after the Indus River Valley civilizations disappear. We have these Indo-Aryans who kind of find their way into what's now modern India, kind of from Central Asia, right? And so we kind of hear a little bit about Aryan culture, Indo-Aryan culture through their hymns, right? And those hymns are preserved in the Rig Veda, right? And so we hear about their kind of interest in cattle. They're asking the gods to bless them with cattle and with good harvests and good soil and rain and with sons, right? So that's important, right? Because what a society asks the gods for are the things that are important to them, right? The things that they really want. That's what they ask the gods for, right? And so here we kind of hear what the Indo-Aryans are asking the gods for, and so that tells us a little bit about what their life is like and what's important to them. We read a little bit the other day about their family lives and how kind of men were the head of the household, and sort of the role of honor for sons and for taking care of the father. Yeah, we heard about all those things in the Rig Veda. I won't go through that again. And then we watched a little bit of this story of India, right? So we heard a little bit about Sanskrit and its similarity to other languages around the world, probably because Sanskrit has a common grandparent language with lots of these other languages that exist around the world too. And so we saw that, William Jones was taught Sanskrit by a Brahmin priest, and he started to notice that a lot of the words are actually similar to other languages. And so you can see, I've got a few of them listed here, and you can see the kind of words that linguists choose, right? They don't choose like disestablishmentarianism. They don't choose big complicated words. They choose simple ones, right? Mother, father, one, fire, mountain, king, God, right? Very simple words that are in existence in all languages, right? And you look and you see, yeah, they're shockingly similar, right? And so again, that shows that they have a language in common in the past, right? They've evolved or they've descended from the same kind of parent language. Yeah, Baha. Yeah, that's what in where is king? Yeah. Yeah. What they don't what? No, and not all of them do, right? And so again, new words appear. Sometimes people choose different words, and so yeah, not all of them are identical, but there's a lot of similarities, right? Field is a little bit different too, right? Look at field, feld in German. In Spanish, it's campo, right? That's a different word. That's agros. Agros in Greek, right? Ager in Latin, right? So there's some words do actually evolve and change and get replaced, right? But other ones stay remarkably similar, right? Like father. What else? Yeah, so this is kind of a linguistic anthropology thing, and we talked about that earlier in this course. And I showed you this diagram earlier in the course, and this is exactly what William Jones was kind of discovering and what they were talking about in the documentary, is that there seems to have been this group of people living in kind of Central Asia thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago. And as those groups kind of moved out and settled in new places in sort of Northern Asia and into Europe and into what's now kind of Iran and further into India, people that spoke that original Indo-European language spread out, and those languages started to kind of evolve and develop on their own. So they retain a bunch of similarities, but then they've also become quite distinct, right? So Sanskrit speakers, could not speak to Greek speakers, of course, but there are similarities in the languages, right? And we can trace this back through those similarities, right? Yeah, so I showed you this before, and you can see some of the branches of these kind of language groups. And so Sanskrit, of course, is in the Indic branch, and it kind of gives rise to a bunch of other languages like Punjabi and Hindi and Urdu and Bengali, Gujarati, and all of these kind of languages of the Indian subcontinent. But if you go back, they are related to an earlier group that's probably living in Central Asia. But again, we don't know what that language was like because it's been lost to time, right? The only evidence of that language ever existing are the similarities between all of these, right? Yeah, so we heard a little bit about the Aryan people. The professor, the Indian professor who our host spoke to, I don't remember her name, unfortunately. She was saying that Aryan means the civilized people, right? And this is true of a lot of different cultural groups and civilizations. Every civilization thinks of themselves as the civilized group. And they look at other people different from them and say, oh, what a bunch of savages, right? So it's very kind of common for one culture to think of themselves quite highly and think of everyone else as less than them. The Greeks thought everyone else were below them, and so they called them barbarians. And so everyone who was not Greek was a barbarian because they thought other languages sounded like bar 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 bar. So that's where the term barbarian comes from. So yeah, that's a very common thing. But anyway, they looked at themselves as civilized people, and in the Vedas we kind of hear evidence of rivers that they crossed and mountains that they moved through and battles that they engaged in. And so we've got kind of little remnants of their history as they moved from Central Asia into what's now northern India. We heard a little bit about this sacred drink, soma, right, which our brave narrator sought out in a bazaar and drank a little bit of, right? And it's got it has a narcotic effect, right? It's ephedrine, and it sort of gives you a bit of a buzz, maybe similar to caffeine except stronger. And so the Vedic hymns talk a lot about this drink, and people drank it and maybe stayed up all night and wrote these hymns to the gods. We saw in the video a city that's now in Turkmenistan, which is kind of Central Asia, and our narrator kind of imagines that maybe this is where our Indo-Aryans actually came from, right? Maybe they originated in this part of Asia, and then when climates changed and rivers moved, some people moved to the west, and then others, our Indo-Aryan friends, they moved to the east and found their way into India. Yeah, so that's the city that, what was his name? Vladimir Saryanidi. That's what the Russian archaeologist was excavating, this giant city in the middle of Central Asia. I put some information in here just for your reading pleasure. I don't think I'll go through it, but some of the things that have been found at that site. Okay, so I've got more of that documentary to show you, and the documentary is about to get really interesting. But first, I'd just like you to go over these 4 pages in the text. Some of the things we've heard about already, some of the things are kind of new, and I'd like to do that. So maybe I'll give you about 12 minutes or so. We'll read over this section of the text, we'll answer the questions, and then I've got more cool stuff to show you about India. Has anyone been to India? No? Have you? Where in India have you gone? In Punjab? What's kind of the main city there? Is it Chandra? It's what?
The capital?
Yeah, the capital. But in Punjab, is Delhi in Punjab, or is it?
It's separate. I mean, it's in
Yeah.
Pakistan.
Right. What's it like?
It's a country which is called the Warriors.
Yeah.
There's kind of a city.
Mm-hmm.
And as we have common sense, like girls and boys are different, but we don't treat each other differently the same.
Right.
If a boy is supposed to cook, then the boy fights, the girl also fights. So equal.
Cool. Okay, so let's start working on this. Take 12 minutes, and then we'll talk about it, and then again I have more to show you. Okay, people. So, again, we're hearing a little bit about what we already know, so I'm going to maybe skip over that first question because we've talked about that. But what kind of changes are kind of occurring in this sort of Vedic age in northern India? So these Indo-Aryans come into this land, and then what kind of developments are kind of happening? What's that? What? Wagon. Yeah, they had wagons a long time ago. It's not a development. Huh? What?
Horses?
Horses? No, they still had horses. They brought those things with them. But what's happening? They did what? Yeah, they probably would have come with their language, but their language continues to kind of evolve and develop. Yeah, things start to become more kind of complex and politically centralized, right? So we kind of had that period in the Indus River Valley civilization where things got really kind of complex and centralized, right? And then maybe due to climate change, that political and economic centralization kind of falls apart. People kind of scatter out and do their own thing. But now it seems like we have a period where people are starting to settle again, and social and economic and political complexity are starting to increase again, right? So what else is happening? They definitely influence it. I don't know the history of this in a lot of detail. It seems that these Indo-Aryan people kind of impose their culture a little bit on the people who are already living there, but there seems to have been some kind of blending as well, right? So it's kind of a fusion of two cultures, and again, I'm not really sure how much was imposed on whom, but this sort of new Indian culture that's kind of being born here is kind of a synergy or a fusion or a combination of the Indo-Aryans and the Indians who were already living there. What else is going on? Yeah, more complicated agriculture, more settled farms. Yeah, what else? Yeah, we have some religious developments or maybe some social developments happening. What's happening there? Yeah, so they're kind of laying the foundation of Hinduism, and what does that start with? What?
Brahmanism?
Yeah, this sort of religious tradition of the Indo-Aryans is kind of evolving into something that scholars are calling Brahmanism, right? And so it's based on those original Vedas that we heard before, those hymns that were written by the Indo-Aryans, but now these Brahmins are adding to those writings with some of their own, right? What are those additions called? Upanishads, yeah. This is kind of they've added another book, if you will, to the Rig Veda. What's kind of interesting about this Upanishad writing? Something very interesting about it. It's what? Well, it has been preserved, which is always interesting, right? We can learn a lot from what people write down. But what's interesting about what's in it? Yeah, a new set of ideas. And what are those ideas? Sitting near, that's what it means, but what kind of ideas are in there? So interesting. They were the what?
It was for those who were dissatisfied with Brahmanism.
Yeah, so there's there's a bit of dissatisfaction happening in terms of an explanation of the world, right? So keep in mind that in a lot of ancient religions and in a lot of modern ones, where does truth about the universe come from? Well, it comes from up there, right? God tells you how things are, or the gods tell you how things are. Knowledge comes from the heavens, right? But here, something very interesting is happening. These Brahmins who are kind of somewhat dissatisfied with what they read in the Rig Veda, what are they trying to do? What are they trying to do? Change it, but what are they trying to do? They're trying to add their own. Yeah, they're trying to add their own ideas. And what are those ideas? What are they about? Because it seems to me that these dissatisfied Brahmins have questions about the nature of the universe, right? Why are we here, right? What is the point of all of this? Who am I? What happens after I die, right? And it's so interesting because most of those answers usually come from religion. But here, these guys are sitting down saying, you know what? We can figure this out, right? We can figure out how the universe works if only we are calm and quiet and meditative. We can actually figure out the universe and how it works, right? So there's something very interesting happening here, whereas in a lot of ancient religions and a lot of modern ones, gods are in charge of the universe, right? Gods are in charge of bringing the rain and the thunder, and the sun god moves across the sky and all of these things. And here, these Brahmins are saying, yes, there's still gods, but the universe kind of operates according to some sort of universal principle. What do they call that? Starts with a B. This universal order of the universe. Brahman. Yeah, Brahman is the universal order, right? It's almost like the Egyptian Mat, right? This idea that the universe exists and functions in a certain way. It's not the gods that are making everything happen. It's the idea that the universe has an order to it. It sort of behaves in a certain way on its own, right? What else did they figure out in connection with that? About karma? Yeah, what's karma? Yeah, there's this universal law that good behavior and good deeds results in a reward, right? In the fact that when your soul is reborn, you are born into a better form, right? And if you do bad things, well then the reverse happens, right? There's some sort of cosmic principle of fairness, which is interesting as well, because in a lot of other ancient religions, there is good and bad, but really, you're just asking the gods, right? Please help me, oh God, do this thing, or please give me this thing. And if the gods want to, they'll give it to you, right? But here, you actually have some autonomy, right? You can actually affect your ability to be born into a better existence simply by doing good. You're in the driver's seat, right? You don't have to, oh, please save me, oh gods, which, Brahmins still did, of course, but you can actually do this, right? You are in control, to some degree, of your cycle of death and rebirth. You can improve your situation if only you act as a good person. That's interesting. What else? Say that again? Yes. They have. That's how we know about all this. Unless I'm missing what you're saying. What else? What's the soul called? The eternal soul. Nope. Atman, right? So all of us have an eternal soul. There is something in us that is not of the physical world. It is something eternal, right? Something that cannot be destroyed. And so what is the point of all this thought? What are they really trying to figure out? In a way, yeah. So kind of how to escape this cycle of death and rebirth, right? Your soul dies and then is born again over and over and over again. And if you do good deeds, then you'll be born, into sort of a better form. And if you don't, you'll be born into a worse form. And this whole thing, sort of this cycle continues over and over and over into eternity. How to escape from this? And the Brahmins think they've figured it out. What's the secret? Yeah, but what's the secret to this? What's the secret to escaping from this endless cycle of deaths and rebirths? Meditating, and through meditation you realize that material world is not important, and your Atman, your soul, is one with Brahman, right? So you are one with the universe. You are not separate from it, right? You're not just a soul traveling through the universe, but in fact you are the universe, and the universe is you, and you are just kind of one expression of it, right? And so that's what frees you from the cycle of death and rebirth, the realization and the understanding that we are not different, and the universe is not different from us. We are all the universe, and we are all part of everything, right? Which I think that's what it is, but I haven't really attained that state yet. But very interesting, right? Because again, all of this stuff doesn't come from up there, right? It doesn't come from the gods. It comes from inside, right? That if you can simply sit and meditate and understand the nature of the universe, you can be freed from this cycle. You don't have to ask the gods to do it. You can do it on your own, right? And truth is not up there. Truth comes from in here, which is really interesting and very different from lots of other religions that are kind of floating around at the time. I don't know. I think that's really thoughtful for 3,500 years ago. They did have drugs. However, this is not a drug-induced. It's not a drug-induced thing. At least I don't think so. But yeah, it's a really interesting idea, right? And again, it's really different from other kind of religious traditions that are floating around, but not entirely different from others that will also appear. But we'll talk about those in a little bit. You want to take a little break now? Would that give me some good karma if I give you a break now?
No,
What does karma mean?
I've never understood this.
You've heard it before, right?
Yeah.
What's karma?
Your actions affect your actions affect others and yourself. Like if you do something bad, it'll come back to you later.
Yeah.
If you do something good, you'll be rewarded. You'll be rewarded for it like at a later time.
Yeah. So karma is kind of like this law, this universal principle that if you do bad things, you will bad things will come back to you somehow, right? And if you do good things will somehow come back to you. And in this context, it has to do with your cycle of death and rebirth. If you do good things, you will be, born as something better next time, hopefully. If you do bad things, well, you may be born as a cockroach next time or something. I don't know. I don't know how it works. Okay, let's take a little break because that's good for my karma, and come back and we'll keep pulling this apart. Okay, and we are officially back. So again, in northern, in sort of northern India here, we see the beginnings of Hinduism and kind of the beginnings of what will eventually become modern Indian culture kind of appearing, right? This fusion between kind of indigenous Indians who are already living in India and these kind of Indo-Aryan migrants or invaders, however you want to phrase them. They're kind of combining to sort of create this culture. And so, let's see. So these Aryans bring a few things. They bring agriculture with them. Well, they don't bring agriculture with them. Agriculture's already there. But agriculture kind of continues to develop and becomes more important in people's lives. We see people specializing in certain crafts, which we also saw when the Mesopotamian and Indian civilizations developed, right? People started farming more, they started producing more food, and it freed people up to do other things. And that's happening in northern India here in this period as well. People are being freed up to craft other types of goods, right? So there's new iron tools which are being created, so that's pretty exciting, right? We started out with copper, and then we started out with bronze. Now we have people who are smelting iron, which is much more difficult to do. You have to have a furnace or an oven that is much hotter than for using copper or bronze. So this is a big technological innovation. And we have larger towns and cities starting to grow, right? We read about the fact that these political systems that are appearing are diverse across northern India. So some places are going to be ruled by these sort of clan chiefs and assemblies in kind of a sort of democratic situation, but maybe a family organized democracy, if you will, with these rajas, the head of the family clan or whatever, kind of having a chunk of the power. Some of them are kind of oligarchical, so people with money or power being in charge. Some of them have a king. And so kind of each part of northern India is a little bit different in terms of how it rules itself. But it's a bunch of little kingdoms at this point, ruled in different ways. Let's see, what else? Oh yeah, and we also read about this Varna system. What is this Varna system about? What's the Varna system? What's that? There's a what?
Society.
Okay, well, it has to do with society, but what is it? It's a classification system, and how does it classify people? Yeah, in part it has to do with their occupation, and there's another element to it as well, which is kind of interesting.
Why after the whole person, the son is kind of inherit his job?
Yeah, so there's this system of social hierarchy or social stratification has to do with occupations. It is hereditary, so you are in the same kind of Varna as your father. And what's the other aspect to this, which is interesting? What's the other aspect that's interesting or different? The question is,
There's no king.
the Varna system, what?
There's no king.
No, not necessarily. In the Varna system, we have a social hierarchy system where some people have, it's divided up by occupation, but what's the other element to that? What's the difference between the Varnas? They're what? There are 4 classes. There are 4 classes, but there's another element to this. There's another element. What's the other element, I wonder? Social hierarchy, part of it has to do with occupation. There's something else too. I can wait, it's okay. Right. There's an element of kind of religious purity that is also goes along with this, right? So who's at the top? Who's at the top of this Varna system? Yeah, what are they called? Brahmins, right? So Brahmins are kind of the priests. They're the people at the top of the social order. And they also have the most kind of ritual purity, right? They're the ones who are kind of the most religiously pure, I guess. Who's next down the ladder? Kshatriyas, who are they're the warriors. Yeah. Who's next? Vaishyas, who are regular people, mostly farmers, maybe some craftspeople, maybe some merchants. And then at the bottom? What's that? But they're not slaves.
Servants.
They're what?
Servants.
Nope.
Shudra.
Shudras. Yeah, Shudras are at the bottom, right? And so there's this kind of social hierarchy that is interesting because it is hierarchical, and I'll say this in a second. One, because it's hierarchical. Two, because it has to do with ritual purity, right? Which is kind of interesting because if you think about, let's say our society here, there are people that are at the top of society, right? They have money and power, and maybe they have, celebrity parents or something like that. And then there's people at the bottom, but the people at the top don't have any sort of like religious or ritual purity, right? Justin Trudeau does not have any sort of, he's not seen as necessarily more pure than any of the rest of us, right? But he does have a family name, and he does have money, and he is the Prime Minister of Canada. So this is kind of interesting, this situation where there's these different classes of people, and not only is there an occupation element to it and a power element, but there's also a religious purity element, which is interesting. I also want to take this opportunity to point out the difference between ascribed status and achieved status. And so the Varnas are a good example of ascribed status. So that's a status that you get just because of who you are. You don't have to do anything to get it. An achieved status is something that you have to work for. You have to achieve it, right? So again, if you're a Brahmin, you just are, right? You're born into that Varna. That's just who you are. You don't have to really earn that status. An achieved status would be something you have to work for. So if you're a gold medal winning Olympic athlete, that's an achieved status, right? You have to work for that. You don't just get it, right? So here we have a system developing that is based on ascribed status. You're born into your Varna, and that's kind of who you are, right? To some degree anyway. Yeah, so we've got these 4 Varnas here based on occupation, different levels of power, but also different levels of ritual purity, okay? Yeah, and so this kind of Varna system is going to have pretty significant effects on people's lives. It will, of course, determine your occupation and the kind of life you have. Will also determine who you can marry, and it will also kind of make sure that certain families remain in power and remain in, that continue to have money and influence, and some families really never will be able to rise, right? So there won't really be any social mobility in a society like this, because if you're born a Brahmin, then you will always be a Brahmin, and your children will be Brahmins, and your children's children will be Brahmins, and you'll always be at the top. If you're born into a Shudra family, there's really no way to move your way up, right? You won't be able to marry into another Varna, and there's really nothing you can do to rise up the social ladder, because it's not about money, right? It's not like if you make money or if you get training, you can climb the ladder. You're kind of just, you are where you are, right? So this sort of social hierarchy remains very static, because there's really no way to, there's no way to climb it, right? It's an ascribed status. When you're born Kshatriya, that's where you stay, right? You can't really move. Right. So the next thing that's happening here is the beginning of Hinduism as a religion. Again, it's kind of based on this Brahmanism. It's based on the sort of Rig Vedas that the Indo-Aryans bring with them, but it develops over time, and some Brahmin thinkers add this Upanishad book to the end, right? And so again, there's kind of a questioning of reality happening here, right? A thing that, if we think about the universe, and if we sort of connect with how it works, we can actually figure it out, right? We can control it. And I think it's kind of interesting because, again, it's different than simply looking to the heavens for knowledge, right? But it's also very similar to what's going to happen in ancient Greece later on. And so the ancient Greek philosophers are going to be doing the same thing. They're going to be kind of laying the foundations for science as they look at the world around them and say, you know what? We think that the world operates according to a set of natural laws, and if we pay close attention, we can figure out how it works, right? That's what science is it not? The idea that the world works in predictable ways, and if you pay close attention, you can figure it out. You can learn how it works. And so, very interestingly, some of these Brahmins are doing the same thing. They're paying attention to the nature of reality with the idea that they will be able to figure out how it works. And once they do, that will give them some degree of control over their lives or their atmans, right? Over their soul, if you can figure it out, right? And again, it's a bit of a different focus. The Greek philosophers were kind of looking outward. These Brahmins are kind of looking inward, but it's kind of a place where humans start to try and figure out the universe on their own terms rather than looking to the heavens and asking the gods, what is the nature of the universe? So again, it's a really interesting development, I think, in India, and it's in some ways very similar to what's happening in Greece and kind of laying the foundations of philosophy and science, but in another way it's actually very, very different from what the Greeks will do a little bit later. So we learned about this transmigration, this sort of process of death and rebirth. We learned about the essence of the universe, the way the universe works according to Brahman. Karma determines what your next birth will kind of look like, and if you do good deeds, you get reborn as a better thing, right? And Atman, this eternal soul that we all have within us. Yeah. Okay, we talked about all that. We've talked about this. I'm going to leave that for now. And yeah, this is where I want to be. Okay. So I want to continue with this story of India because the documentary now is going to tell us about a little more about this sort of revolution of thought that is going on in sort of ancient India. And so if you'll just give me a second here, I'm just going to put this information into Microsoft Teams for our online people. And let's see here. As you can see, what I would like you to do is watch from, for online people, I want you to watch from about 7 minutes to 26:23. Okay, so about 20 minutes or so is what we'll watch, and that's what we'll do in class here as well. So maybe online people, I'll turn you loose. I'll turn you loose to watch this section of the documentary and then answer the questions. And similarly, we will watch this section of the documentary here in class, and then we won't really have time to talk about it, but we will talk about it on Tuesday. Okay. So online people, I will set you free and let you watch that section of the documentary, and then we'll see you all on Tuesday, not on Monday. And so online people, I hope you have a good weekend. We'll see you then, okay?